and welcome to The Brief. It is Tuesday's edition, and as usual, I'm Jessy Chahal. Joining me today on his crisis brief update is Nordin, Abdullah, our resident crisis management analyst, to walk us through the adoption of NFTs and cryptocurrency. And a little later, I'll be joined by Bernama's very own Nina Muslim, speaking to us about the new Taliban 2.0 regime and its implication on women's rights. Now, the government, in a news in brief, the government say that they're in the process of assessing the suitability of implementing the GST and the usage of other taxation models. The study is taking into consideration all aspects, including the weaknesses of the existing SST and the GST implemented way back in 2015. Moving on, the government say they will continue to protect the people from the impacts of rising inflation by continuing to provide subsidies despite rising global oil prices due to the Russia-Ukraine war. National Budget Office says this is the government's consideration, taking into account the country still being in the early stages of recovery from the pandemic. And Deputy Foreign Minister Datuk Kamarudin Jaafar will lead Malaysia's delegation to the 48th session of the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, this 22nd till 23rd March. He's expected to highlight Malaysia's firm resolve on Palestinians, humanitarian solidarity to the Afghanistan people, and the OIC reform. And an update on the Prime Minister's diplomatic tour in Vietnam. According to Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, Malaysia recognizes Vietnam's COVID-19 vaccination certificate to boost tourism activities between the two countries post-pandemic or in the new norm. The Prime Minister says this is as Vietnam used WHO-approved vaccines and recognizes Malaysia's vaccination certificate. And the Ministry of Health has approved CanSino's single-dose Convidacia COVID-19 vaccine to be used as a booster available via MySejahtera very soon. Those who previously took the Sinovac or CanSino BioVaccine primer doses can also take the vaccine as a booster dose. All boosters can only be taken 3 months after the primer dose. Well, it's time to bring in Nordin Abdullah for the crisis brief and update. Today, we're looking at NFTs and cryptocurrency, plus all the hype around it. Nordin, welcome back on board. One of the main knocks against cryptocurrency has always been that it may never, or in other words, will never gain universal adoption, meaning to say its usefulness is deemed as limited. Late last year, El Salvador became the first country in the world to accept Bitcoin as a legal tender. That is setting precedent for many other countries, all looking towards El Salvador as well. A number of countries since, though, have legalized crypto, and Ukraine is the latest on that list, as digital currency donations are coming in to the country in the midst of the Russian invasion. Now, locally, Nordin, yesterday at the Parliament, the Communications and Multimedia Ministry proposed that digital currencies such as cryptocurrency be adopted as legal tender as well. This with the perspective to help younger generation who are now pretty active users of this currency, especially the NFTs or non-fungible tokens. This is now becoming quite the in thing as well. However, the Deputy Finance Minister says that cryptocurrencies are still not recognized, and he says that they are not a payment instrument that is regulated by Bank Negara. So with all this happening, Nordin, what's your take on this? Should it be legal tender or not? What could possibly go wrong, Nordin?
Well, Jessy, this is a very interesting discussion that's going on, and it's happening in the public sphere as well as in the different government departments. So when we take a step back and look at the overall picture, we see that we're moving down this journey of digitalizing the economy. And part of the modern digital economy is digital currencies and cryptocurrencies and NFTs and a whole basket of financial instruments are there. Now, I liken this to once upon a time, there was no Islamic banking. People have come to realize Islamic banking is as something that's normal for Muslims and non-Muslims. But 30, 40, 50 years ago, it wasn't a thing. And now it is a very mature sector of the economy. So when we start to look at this issue and we start to see what the Ministry of KCOM, now that they call it, and the Deputy Minister is doing, he's getting ahead of the curve. So for us in crisis management, we always like to see people and policies that are getting ahead of any potential threats to leaving the Malaysian economy and a Malaysian people behind. So the world is moving, the digital economy is moving. If you don't move with it, you'll be left behind. So this is the reality that we are now dealing with. So for me, it's about getting the objective right, and we're setting the objective. Now we're going to start looking at whether or not the government will come up with a unified policy around digital economy and digital. They do have a unified policy around digital economy. Will they have now? Will that cascade down into this digital currencies? Right, then we can start to regulate it differently.
Right. Before we get there, though, Nordin, myth or fact? I mean, if Malaysia starts to adopt this, does that also mean that we are exposing ourselves to even more cyber attacks, perhaps even hacks? Will we be able to continue and operate safely and efficiently? I think this is still a stumbling block for many people, organizations, to break, to understand that, perhaps this is how the new norm, the new future is going to be like.
Well, Jessy, we always say in crisis management, for every crisis, there's an opportunity. Now there's an opportunity, and if we don't look at it from both sides, when we look at opportunities and threats, we'll fail to understand the full reality. And I think this is where the Deputy Minister is saying, look, there's a massive opportunity, especially for young people in the economy. Getting them into a global digital economy should be a key target of this government and any government moving forward. Now it's, I think, Ministry of Finance on the flip side is saying, look, this is a regulatory matter. We need to regulate this better. Why? It talks about income. It talks about threats. When you talk about cybersecurity, you're talking about this flip side of the opportunity. So once you start to get that right and understand that this needs to be further regulated, you'll realize that there needs to be a deepening of the talent pool. And we need to have an increased talent in the country who understands the digital economy game, the digital currency game, the NFT game. And if not, we're going to miss out. And countries like Singapore, Thailand, who are also moving quickly, will take up the lead, and we will miss out. That's the crisis.
That's the crisis. Okay, so talent pool, that being the main the main fact here as well, in order for us to move ahead with breaking into this sphere. Malaysia has recently run into some problems with Bitcoin mining. Police have said that Bitcoin miners have stolen about $2 million in total in terms of electricity during 2020 alone. And this stealing of power for Bitcoin mining is something that is quite, robust here in the country, of course, because the practice is illegal. But despite all that challenges, there are many other countries still looking forward and ahead. For example, the US too is considering crypto. Joe Biden has recently said that him and his team will outline a plan for digital assets that includes, in fact, research and a study on the impact of crypto. So there's a lot of activity here internationally as well, and I'm sure to some extent that will influence the ASEAN region in terms of business practices and wanting to move forward. How do we take all of this forward so that we're not late to the table, so to say, Nordin?
Global benchmarking is imperative. The fact that the Malaysian police also picked up on some of this illegal bit mining is also a very encouraging sign that they understand some of the problems, and they're not they're not behind the eight ball in any way. So now, whenever we see these big opportunities, those global crime syndicates will look for weak areas of weak regulatory realities, and then they'll exploit that. And now that Malaysia has actually started to pick up on this, they will look elsewhere. So we'll start to attract the right type of people into this new evolving digital economy. And this is one of the things that we're actually looking at next week in the Malaysia Global Business Forum. The Deputy Ministers actually agreed to speak. And we're looking at the direction of digital resilience in Malaysia. And when you get the direction of digital resilience right, you understand the opportunity, you can start to set policy right. You can start to set regulatory frameworks in place so that every individual is protected. And when every individual is protected, then they feel safe to move forward. And that's the key role of the government right now.
That's right. I think that's the point where we are right now, at that cusp of ensuring that we have the talent pool and assuring people that this is perhaps, if it is legalized, then it is a safe way to go. Nordin, we'll speak to you again tomorrow and check in with you on more crisis updates. Till then, do take care. That was Nordin Abdullah, crisis management analyst, weighing in a little bit on NFTs and cryptocurrency. You may want to do some reading and catching up on it. I know I've lots to learn still. It's quite interesting how all of this is unfolding globally as well. Speaking of globally, let's look at business in brief, locally and around the world. The ringgit opened marginally lower against the greenback today on worries of the US rate hike campaign to stabilize pressures. Now, as of 9 a.m., $1 rose up to 4 ringgit and 21 cent. At the Bursa, it ended trading session on a low note as selling pressure resumed, with buying the session. At 12:30 p.m., FBM KLCI was 2.54 points lower at 1584.62. And gold as a commodity, the physical price of gold as of 9:30 a.m. earlier today is at 252 ringgit 94 cent per gram. And a quick look at the money market. Short-term rates are expected to remain stable today on Bank Negara's operations to absorb surplus liquidity from the financial system. The liquidity is estimated at 50.65 billion ringgit in the conventional system and 20.68 million ringgit in Islamic funds. And in international business, Telegram became Russia's top messaging application, surpassing WhatsApp following a rapid increase in its use since the country's attack on Ukraine. Telegram's share rose to 63%, while WhatsApp's dropped to 32% in the first 2 weeks of March. Access to Instagram and Facebook has been banned in Russia. And speaking of things that happen globally, of course, this is our feature segment now, and I like to bring in our very own Nina Muslim, Bernama's special writer. Now, a few weeks ago, Nina, you went to Afghanistan, and since your return, you've penned down some of your stories on your time there. Again, all of that available on Bernama.com. Let's talk a little bit about, what you saw and about some of the conversations you had with women in Afghanistan, Nina. What is the situation or the scenario there right now? What did you observe during your time there?
Thank you, Jessy, for having me again. When I was in Afghanistan, I managed to talk to a few women. Basically, a few of them were introduced to me by some NGOs like Mercy Malaysia and Global Peace Mission Malaysia, and a few of them I tried to find myself, and they were telling me that although that the Taliban 2.0, which is what they're calling them, the ones who are ruling Kabul right now, Afghanistan right now, they are kinder and more moderate versus their previous rule between 1996 and 2001. But they are still very afraid, and they're worried that the promises that they have made are just a facade to be accepted by the international community, and later on they will regress to their original mindset.
Mm-hmm. there's still somewhat of a fear and uncertainty and uncertainty around the situation there. But it is, still March, and coming off from March 8th, which is International Women's Day. What did you observe about women's rights?
In Kabul, it's the liberal center, you would say, progressive center of Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is a very traditional and conservative country. I didn't have a chance to travel outside Kabul much. The only place I went other than Kabul is Nangarhar province, and which used to be Al-Qaeda country. It had training camps, Al-Qaeda training camps there. And I talked to the women there, and they were all mostly dressed in burqa. And I asked if they minded wearing it and stuff, and asked them about women's rights and being under Taliban rule again. And they pretty much said that they don't mind wearing the burqa because it's traditional, it's their cultural heritage, and they're used to it. And when I asked about being under the Taliban again, they said that they're more concerned about surviving for the next day and having enough food to feed their children versus losing whatever freedoms they had.
That's right. To survive and to keep living, I think, at the forefront of their minds. But how do Afghanis feel about the regime? We talk about the 2.0 as well. What are people on the ground talking about when you were there and spending time speaking to the locals?
Well, pretty much what I said. They are worried that they are going to regress because while I was there were already a few restrictions that were announced, which was saying that women couldn't travel without mahram if they're leaving the country. And a lot of women, I talked to them about it, they were very worried about that because a lot of them want to leave the country because they don't think they have much of a future in Afghanistan.
Would you
now.
say the accusations of Western media, for example, is a true reflection of what is happening on the ground in Afghanistan and with the regime of Taliban?
I would say, well, in news, there is a bad news bias, which means that we tend to report something that is unusual and bad news sells. I would say that what they say is true, but it may not be as balanced in terms of coverage because only the big bad stuff gets reported. I mean, just because somebody is so hungry and poor and they cannot take care of their children that they end up selling their kids doesn't mean that every single parent in Afghanistan is doing that. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a few charities that take care of orphans, and they said that they haven't had, in their case, that they haven't had any parents abandoning their children because they couldn't afford to feed their kids.
Yeah, I honestly found both of your recent articles on Bernama.com enlightening. And the most recent one focuses on the situation of women in the country. Tell us a little bit about the story of the doctor and the journalist there, Nina.
Well, I talked to Dr. Fauzia. I found her while I was trying to do a story on child and maternal health because of the humanitarian crisis. And she volunteered to me the information that she just got married and that she has never met her husband. And I was a bit taken aback, and I asked, like, how did that happen? And she said that she got married. She accepted the proposal 2 days after the Taliban took over because her husband is he's an Afghan, but he's also an Australian national. So she thought that he would be able to help her get out of the country. And before this, his mother had already met her, and wanted to hook those two together. And she always said, "No, I'm not interested because I want somebody in this country." But suddenly, when the Taliban came back, she was like, "You know what? I'm okay. I'm open. I'll say yes to your son. I'll marry
take a
him."
chance. Any update from her? Any news?
Oh, yes. actually, she on the day that the story came out, she was meeting her husband. She was picking him up at the airport in Iran, and she sent me some photos, and they look very good together. They look very happy, and all smiles, and I hope they'll be very happy together. But I think she made the right decision in this case, so she got lucky.
That's right. You spoke about in the article as well, mentioning that you are the first person, in fact, to be doing this sort of on the ground research since the regime has come into power. Mainly the only woman that has done so so far. What are some of the advantages of being a woman reporting in Afghanistan, you think?
I'll have to correct that. I was actually probably the first woman journalist from Malaysia. There are plenty of female journalists from other country in Afghanistan. I met one at the hotel that I was staying at. She was from France. And I know that Washington Post and New York Times have journalists on the ground there too. The advantages of being a woman, I would say, in like Afghanistan is, for one thing, is you're able to talk to women. Women in general, I think, I'm not saying that they are very suspicious of men, but there is that, especially in a regime sort of like under the Taliban, where there is always this concern that this person might carry information or stories over to people that you don't want to hear about it. I would say that they're still very, very forthright and very brave. They didn't mind me taking their picture. They didn't mind me writing everything they said. But they did ask, like, oh, is this going to come out in Malaysian media, not local? So I think that also helped, the fact that it wasn't local coverage, that it was foreign coverage. So they're more open.
And it's really, exciting in terms of, going out there and meeting these people, but also quite scary to a certain extent because you never know what to expect. But hats off to you, and thank you for going out there to grab these stories. And we look forward to speaking to you again. That was Nina Muslim, our special writer here at Bernama. It's time to move into international news now. More rescuers and medical experts arrived at the plane crash site in South China's Guangxi Chuang Autonomous Region just last night. The China Eastern Airlines flight MU5735 took off from Kunming and was bound for Guangzhou, carrying 123 passengers and 9 crew members when it crashed, causing a mountain fire. Meanwhile, the US has formally determined that violence committed against the Rohingya minority in Myanmar's military amounts to genocide and crimes against humanity. The attacks against the Rohingya people is cited to be widespread and systematic, with evidence pointing clear intent to destroy the Muslim minority. And now on to updates on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The EU is ready to impose additional sanctions on Russia over the invasion of Ukraine after meeting the EU foreign and defense ministers. The EU and allies have already imposed hefty measures, including freezing its central bank's assets. But the sanction doesn't seem to bother Russia, as it shows no sign of changing its course on Ukraine. And in the meantime, President Zelensky insists on a meeting with Putin, saying it is not possible to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine without a formal discussion with the Russian leader. He also says that any compromise agreed with Russia to end the war will need to be voted by Ukrainians in a referendum. This might raise concerns on territories occupied by Russian forces. And now on to what's going on in the EU. Germany is ready to provide the core of the EU's new rapid reaction force for the year 2025 ahead of discussions on the EU's new security strategy. EU leaders are expected to sign off the bloc's new security strategy, the so-called Strategic Compass, which aims to create a rapid reaction force of 5,000 troops, overhauling the existing EU battle groups it has in its disposal unused since 2007. And Manchester City has topped the Deloitte Football Money League for the first time as the world's highest revenue generating club in a 2020-2021 season affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Previous leaders, Barcelona, dropped to fourth position in the 25th edition of the table, the Spanish club's lowest position since 2013-2014. And here's what's trending on social media, particularly Twitter. People are keeping up with updates following the China Eastern Airlines tragedy that crashed at South China, with rescue still ongoing. And in the meantime, SPM 2021 trends again as the exams continues this week. And that's all from me today, right here from The Brief. Remember to check in same time, same place tomorrow, where we'll have discussions with experts and panelists, as well as giving you the latest updates in news locally and globally. Thanks for watching.